All right, so my name is Sabrina Maudler. My research focused on No Child Left Behind and what I perceive to be the overall failure it created within the American primary education system. For a little context about me, I've wanted to be a teacher since I was in 7th grade, about 10 years ago. I grew up going to public schools, well-funded public schools, but I've since taught in underfunded public schools, Title I schools, things like that. And I wondered if there were specific policy measures that indirectly or directly harmed these students. So, on to No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind was George Bush's 2001 education policy and a reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act from the 1970s under the Johnson administration. Bush perceived that the US education system was failing and was falling behind the rest of the developed world. At the time of its passing, we had been ranked around 17th in international calculations and rankings based on education system. And Bush sought to change that. He sought to bring us into the new millennium, into the developing world, and bring our education system up along with us. It fundamentally rewired the way schools were run and the way they were funded, based on Bush's 4 pillars. First being capability, that every student is capable of learning what they are expected to. The second being parental rights, that parents should have the right to choose what is best for their child and their children's education. Third being accountability, local measures of accountability, state level measures of accountability, less accountability from the federal government, but more so from the states. And the fourth, a higher rate of spending, more spending on education has been linked to greater student success, and Bush sought to increase the amount of money that schools were receiving. What No Child Left Behind actually did, it introduced more red tape for teachers. It failed to adapt to students' unique circumstances. It created an environment in which content guidelines at schools became what a professor of mine called political footballs that were played with every 4 years and allowed them to be targeted. And it introduced standardized testing as measures of student performance broadly across the country. Firstly, No Child Left Behind also included this, the highly qualified teacher provision. It required teachers to be highly qualified, in which they not only have a degree in education, but also a certification in every subject area they teach. Some school districts, especially rural school districts, found it hard to continue to staff their schools, as schools were required to be highly qualified, and if they were not in compliance, they would receive financial penalties. Teachers in rural districts often also have to teach multiple subjects, meaning that their attention was then taken away from their classrooms while they had to get certified or recertified in other subjects that they hadn't previously been certified in. We also see growing rates of intensification in which policy measures and school policies as well kind of intensify the stress that teachers are under. States were empowered by No Child Left Behind to mandate materials for use in the classroom or approve certain materials for use in the classroom, which took away teachers' abilities to make decisions about their own classrooms. And secondly, school district funding now became dependent on passing rates of both classes and standardized tests, and teachers were incentivized to just kind of shuffle kids through to the next grade so that their schools, many of which were already underfunded, would not lose extra funding. Oh, there we go. On standardized testing, we see a rise of teaching to the test, tests being the be-all, end-all of school performance. Teachers push to teach to the direct lines of what is tested, and students wind up just burning the material out of their mind once they're tested on it. The manner in which some tests are written makes them inaccessible for some students. The most prominent example I can think of, the SAT, has received broad-scale criticism about being culturally blind in such a way that it disadvantages students from diverse households, or IQ tests mentioning blenders. People who may not have access to blenders have no clue what a blender is, so they are designed to fail those tests. We see something called the sawtooth phenomenon, in which any gains made on testing are eliminated whenever those tests change. For example, in Texas, we started with the TAS test under the Bush governance, And then when he left, it changed to tax. And any gains that had been made on the task test were gone. And then when tax changed to STAR, those gains got wiped out. And then testing schools become a source of stress. Personally, I had a mental breakdown in 3rd grade before I took my first STAR test. And I'm sure that's not a unique experience, especially for kids who have been taught that testing is the most important thing in their school lives and the biggest determining factor on whether or not they were a good student, and for some, like myself, a good person. And I asked the question, is teaching to the middle the best way? Teaching to the test with a laser focus on the end of the year standardized assessments can lead teachers to cast students aside who are meeting or exceeding expectations in favor of focusing on students that are lagging behind. To, of course, bring those students up, and I'm not saying that those students don't deserve to be brought up with the rest of the class. However, it coming at the cost of students that are achieving what they need to do, I don't think is a good thing. Tying school funding to test scores incentivize schools to implement draconian rules and punishments. I read an article by Corrine Hurt, she was a PhD candidate at the time, where she described her experience with school truancy officers claiming that they had spoken extensively about her truancy as a result of her own poverty. She had never met this officer in her life, and the officer blatantly lied about knowing Corrine and knowing that she was a truant student. And again, rural students often have completely different lived experiences. Many of them don't want to leave their hometowns. They don't care about physics, they don't care about calculus, most of them. They care about what will directly affect them in their lives. And expecting them to care, to give a shit about standardized testing might not be the best way to teach them. We again see content politicization. No Child Left Behind created a culture of ruthless commitment to the status quo and value neutrality, which wound up kneecapping every attempt at socially conscious education, things like critical race theory and other things like that, which do have legitimate impacts on students. We see increased backlash to accepted science curriculum, things like evolution, climate change. Parents are now, in Texas right now, allowed to opt out of any lesson they find objectionable or that they disagree with or that they don't like their students to learn. And many states will mandate the diversity of opinion in class. When teaching evolution, you also have to teach creationism. When you teach climate change, you have to teach that it might not be real, even though the generally accepted consensus within scientific communities is that climate change is a real thing. And I claim that these can all be traced back to the political landscape created by No Child Left Behind. My biggest example I've found is Arizona's social justice education program. It was a program created in 2001, implemented in the 2001-2002 school year by the University of Arizona in Tucson Unified School District. The program utilized critical perspectives on historic race relations and race issues to teach history within the classrooms. Tucson Unified School District is a majority Latino district that had passing rates in the mid to low 50s. Upon the implementation of the SJP, those passing rates soared to the mid 90s. It was a wildly successful program that was killed by Tea Party Republicans in the state legislature, who found not the fact that it was a successful program objectionable, but they found that the way kids were being taught to be objectionable, that kids challenging the status quo, challenging what they had heard about America versus their lived experiences to be objectionable. This Attorney General at the time, he's currently still the Secretary of Education in Arizona, claimed that they were being taught ethnic chauvinism. But he had never been in one of these classes. He had never experienced it. I watched a documentary about this. He didn't know how to sit in a school desk. It's crazy that that was the Secretary of Education, that was the man in charge of determining educational policy in the state. On to school vouchers. School vouchers is an interesting thing to discuss when talking about No Child Left Behind, because it's the one thing that George Bush didn't get that he wanted. George Bush wanted school vouchers for private and charter schools to be included in No Child Left Behind upon its passing. However, it was the one thing that he did not receive, that Congress did not pass. However, that has still been a part of the playbook, and especially now recently, we have seen pushes and laws passed incentivizing school vouchers. However, in Texas, for example, it's $10,000 per family, but that still often doesn't cover the full cost of private schools, making these costs prohibitive. It also means that 75% of voucher applicants had already once attended private and charter schools, and it was just a discount code for those families. Private schools are still pretty deeply racist institutions. A lot of them were founded in the years leading up to desegregation, and their enrollment spiked during desegregation, with white parents hoping that those schools would remain untouched by desegregation. And while we've seen the number of students of color enrolled at private schools increase, the white population still accounts for around 64% nationwide. Other discrimination, surveys of Orlando public schools, or not public schools, private schools, show that 14% of them still discriminate against LGBT students, a protected class in the United States, and many private schools often require students to waive their rights to 504 plans, individualized education plans, and behavior intervention programs as mandated by law by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so the question, why does this matter? No Child Left Behind isn't law anymore. No Child Left Behind got replaced in 2015 by the Every Student Succeeds Act. However, the ESSA, I'd say, didn't do enough to reverse the course that we were on. Much has been said by teachers online and teachers I've spoken to personally about the fact that kids can't read. And while that's not a new thing, it's kind of the age-old thing that, kids these days can't do anything. Scores have legitimately fallen off, and rates of literacy have legitimately fallen off, especially in the wake of COVID. And teacher attrition in response to COVID-era policies, in response to school vouchers and underfunding, and the intensification that we noted earlier, teacher attrition has increased rapidly, especially in those underserved inner city and rural districts. So my question is, what can we do? The ESSA, like I said, I don't think it did enough. I don't think it changed enough of what was wrong with No Child Left Behind to meaningfully help American public schools. Texas just announced that they're changing the STAR tests from 15 tests from 3rd grade to 12th to now 51 tests, 3 per year in every EOC tested course. And the goal is that they will be lower stakes, that they will matter less, and will give teachers an accurate barometer of how students are performing. Tests aren't always the most accurate barometer of student learning, of student performance, and adding to their stress by more than tripling the testing amount that they're doing is not the right way to go. I think we need to integrate culturally responsible pedagogy. The SJEP was wildly successful. Programs like it, which encourage students to think critically, to engage with the classroom material, to become passionate about the things they are learning, I think are the best ways to improve student performance. Because if a student cares and the teacher cares, they will see more legitimate gains in what they're learning.